how do you read the diplomacy? Because it seems to be all taking place under very strange conditions. This is what the Iranians are complaining about. They don't like negotiations when they have a gun pointed to their head. But given that the US and the Iranians have 47 years of conflict behind them since the Islamic Revolution in 79, there seems to be a lot to resolve. And you know, if you look past all this talk about um, wanting justice for protesters, this kind of stuff. Well, what are the main problems here? Because when you negotiate with the U.S. Navy and its Air Force parked off the coast of Iran, I guess it's great for pressure, but what can Iran be pressured to, and how long can the U.S. actually afford doing diplomacy with such a massive force mounted? This seems like an expensive endeavor.
Well, yeah, and you have to look first of all at what is even the attempt to accomplish here. What are we trying to do? And it certainly makes sense that the Iranian side would be very frustrated because, as you just alluded to, I mean, just in the last month or so just in the last few weeks, I mean, it's either those poor protesters in Iran, we have to defend them, or well, it's the nuclear program again, or well, it's their long range missiles, or it's their proxy forces, or it's just the fact that they exist. And it's sometimes kind of back and forth here. So, what exactly is it that we're negotiating for? What when we say we're looking for diplomacy, a diplomatic outcome towards what end? What does the end state look like? What does it look like for the United States for it to say, okay, if diplomacy works, this is what the end will look like. And we'll have this, this, and that, and they won't have the other thing. And then they'll have X, Y, and Z, and then we'll all live together peacefully. That doesn't exist. And I think the reason it doesn't exist is because this is all driven, and I think we just have to be honest about this, from Israel. This is what Benjamin Netanyahu has long, him and many others, not just him, but he's the prime minister right now, and he is the definite driving force behind all of this. They do not want the Islamic Republic to exist. So they're not looking to curtail their nuclear program. They're not looking to actually limit defensive missiles for their purposes or so. And they would certainly like to have the proxies, turned off. Who wouldn't? But those aren't the fundamental issues. For them, the fundamental issue is the existence of the Iranian regime. They just don't want it to exist. So they're using whatever seems to be pliable to the American public, and that's the primary objective here. The Israeli public is already sold. They don't have to be sold anymore. They're ready to go, and they're totally supportive of this. But the American public is not as much. So they have to try to build a case, and they're like, okay, well, sometimes it's the negotiations on the nuclear program. Well, we don't want a nuclear bomb, and that gets generates some interest. And then there's others because we had such bleeding hearts, and so we'll say, oh, those poor protesters, and they build up that, and then democracy and freedom and freedom of speech, and whatever. It's like whatever works today, we'll try that. Which is why it exposes that there is no actual objective for the United States. So President Trump has so much pressure from either from Benjamin Netanyahu personally or from a lot of the AIPAC sponsor folks in the United States, and there are many of them, and his own allies inside his otherwise inner circle that is supposed to be on his side, but they are definitely on the side of the Israelis against him, and they are putting pressure on him to do something that is not military sound and that is not necessary for our national security, and there is no negotiated path that will make all the parties happy. It just doesn't exist because Israel doesn't want it to exist. So that's why you see the Iranians so frustrated, because they're like, okay, look, this is not anything new for them. I mean, they worked for 2 years with the Obama administration to get the JCPOA, which by all accounts was a flawed, because nothing is perfect in human affairs, but it was really good at its primary objective, which is to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon and to give us confidence that they weren't going down the path to get one. That was all in place with the intrusive inspections, the limits on reprocessing capabilities, the limits on the amount of material they could possess, etc. All those were really, really good things if your objective was actually to prevent a nuclear weapon, which the Iranians said we didn't want anyway, so they can work with that. And then, of course, we tore that up in 2018. We said we wanted a better deal, which means they would give more and get nothing. Surprisingly enough, they weren't interested in that then. And then, they get their embassy blown up in 2024, I think it was. Then they get somebody assassinated in their capital. Later in 2024, they get attacked by Israel in 2025. We claimed that we had a deal then, and we want to do nuclear negotiations. We were in the middle of had already had 5 rounds when the bombs start falling. So Iran is saying, well, where's the diplomacy there? You were just using that as a cover. And now here we are again. Same thing. President Trump says we have 10 to 15 days, several days ago, to come up with a negotiated settlement. But Iran is like, well, what negotiation? We're willing to have a negotiation on here on the nuclear program, if that's your stated objective, but not on these other things here. And there's no rational reason why we would say get rid of your only defensive capability, the long-range missiles, or your extension to try and protect yourself forward with some of these proxies, what they call allies. There's no rational reason to say you have to get rid of those things. There's no justification for it. It's just what we want. So we're asking Iran to do something that is against their national interest, that is counterproductive to their own national security, and that is irrational, that we would never do. And so that means that the only thing left is the use of force. And I think that's by design. And I think that's where we are right now. So I'm hopeful that President Trump will listen to at least what's reported, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Vice President J.D. Vance, and Tulsi Gabbard, who are reportedly all telling him this would be a disaster, don't do it. But there's so many others like Lindsey Graham, Jack Keane, Mike Pompeo, a bunch of other folks. Ted Cruz has joined in recently. All these people are screaming for combat operations and the destruction of Iran. And it's just going to be a matter of who's going to win that pressure contest on the one guy that matters, and that's Donald Trump. And I think that he's probably going to lose that pressure battle.
This is a problem of telling essentially Iran the only reason we haven't bombed you yet is because you have a powerful conventional deterrent, and we will bomb you unless you give up that deterrent, and then just hope that we won't bomb you. Well, it makes it even more problematic, I guess, as you suggested, that you have all these different objectives. I think that they just presenting as a nuclear issue, it's strategically good for communication. It's a good way to getting the whole world behind you, because nobody wants to see Iran with a nuclear weapon. But once there's time to make a deal, it's, as you suggest, is problematic, because if Iran delivers and with a nuclear deal showing that they're not going to get a nuclear weapon, then that entails that our side has to normalize relations with Iran, which means it can strengthen itself. Now, if the ultimate objective is the destruction of Iran, yeah, you can see why we get entangled into this.
And by the way, it's really important to point out here that there are many, but there are two main voices in the U.S. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Jack Keane are emphatic about saying no negotiated deal is good, because all it would do is extend the life of the regime. And we can't do that. So we should not even try to get a negotiated settlement. That's what they're saying out loud in the open. So they don't even want to negotiate. They're just stripping away even the facade that there's actually negotiations. They don't want there to be one, because they say you can't trust them. They never keep their word. And so they're going to get a nuclear bomb and they're going to use it. That's what they say. That's the claim. And so they're saying that there's no alternative but military force. So if President Trump listens to sound military advice and doesn't attack and comes up with any kind of negotiation with Iran, apparently is more than happy to give him some kind of negotiated deal, then he's going to come under continued pressure on the inside. And Israel, I promise you, will never give up on this lust for war with Iran, and they'll keep the pressure going on. And we cannot rule out the possibility that someday they may prompt some kind of an attack that would then force the United States to engage anyway. So it's just hard for me to see how this doesn't end in war.
It does remind me a bit, this conflicting objectives with negotiations with Russia as well, because I remember in June of 2021, you had the former U.S. ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker. He also was, I think, a special envoy on Donbass. And as Biden and Putin were going to meet to try to de-escalate, he wrote this piece where he argued I think it's a direct quote. Yes, success is confrontation. And he warned that no, we shouldn't get a deal that de escalates with the Russians because that would give them legitimacy, breathing room. It would strengthen Putin, and our goal should be the opposite. So that's his conclusion. Yeah, success is confrontation. And this is the problem when you have all these different objectives to weaken rivals, then peace becomes your enemy. So it's. No, it's a very yeah, stupid place to be. So so you think this war is coming now, unless Trump does a massive turnaround. But do you see anything recently, like his performance at the what's called
State of
at
the
the
Union.
State of the
State of the
Union,
Union.
yeah,
Yeah.
speech, where he seemed to perhaps walk back some of his former hardline statements that suddenly it was all about nuclear weapons again. Again, I'm not sure if this is genuine or if this is just him selling the war or pulling back to avoid the war. It's very hard to read him, I think.
Yeah, no, I didn't see it in any hopeful way like that, because he just said, they can't have a bomb. They can't have it. And, he talked about how all these bad things that they have done as well. So all I saw of that was that he was just like, I'm not going to tell anybody tonight what I'm going to do. But he didn't offer any uh, olive branches. He didn't offer any new diplomatic possibilities. He didn't say anything about, well, we're talking and there's some positive signs coming from Tehran. None of that. He just, kind of listed a bunch of claims about how bad that the Iranians were, how many people that they've killed, and all this, painting them as just dastardly regime that can't be allowed to live. And just, we're not going to let them get a bomb. So keeping open the possibility that all we have to do is claim that they're seeking a bomb, which of course there's no actual evidence for that. And even when you ask the obvious absurdity of that about the question, you told us that this was obliterated. You have repeated, even in the recent days, Caroline Leavitt, the spokesman for the White House, has repeated in recent days that yes, it was completely obliterated back then, but now maybe they're going to try and do a new one. Who knows where? They never say that. Who knows how we know that? They never claim that. Even though all the facilities were allegedly obliterated, now all of a sudden, no, it's back on again. And then you had this ridiculous statement by Steve Witkoff on a couple of days ago that says, on top of it being obliterated 7, 8 months ago, now they're 1 week away, 1 week away from having bomb making material weapons grade, which means 90%. Who knows where that's going to be since you obliterated all their facilities, and apparently there's not a new one that's spinning at this 60% reprocessed facility. But that's just accepted at face value. It's just absurd. And again, that's President Trump's primary guy.
That was the White House statement back in June, was anyone who argues that the Iranian nuclear program hasn't been obliterated are spreading fake news. And now, of course, they have to make the case that they could be days away from a nuclear weapons. But in this interview you referred to, Witkoff also made the point that Trump was a bit surprised that the Iranians hadn't capitulated yet. What would that actually entail, though, this capitulation, which Witkoff referred to? Because if it's about nuclear weapons, then yeah, of course, okay, we capitulate. We're not going to develop a nuclear weapon. But how do you operationalize capitulation given the wider demands coming from the United States?
Yeah, the way I interpret that is both Witkoff and Trump, I think, are thinking like they would if they were in their position, like Americans, if somebody had the upper hand against us and came in and said, okay, give up your nuclear weapons, give up your long range missiles, quit supporting your regional allies. We call them proxies. And then we won't bomb you. Everything will be fine. And so to them, they're like, okay, that's what we would do then. It makes, in their minds, sense to do that. Well, I don't want to receive this bomb. And I see this massive armada of power that you have in both the air and the sea and all these bases throughout the region. Sure, why would I not do that? So I think that he was telling the truth there, that he was genuinely perplexed that they didn't accept that, because the only way capitulation means there is not just on a nuclear deal, but it would have to include the missiles and the proxies as well. That's what a capitulation would look like. And to them, they can't imagine somebody saying, no, I'm going to go against what is self-described as the most powerful military on the planet, with all of this incredible firepower displayed. And it is legit. I'm not trying to minimize it. It's a lot of firepower, and it can destroy tremendous amounts of things above the ground, which is an important caveat. And it can kill a lot of people. And there's no doubt. He doesn't understand how someone would say, I would rather not capitulate and suffer that onslaught than to give you everything that you ask. But he doesn't. That means that they have no understanding whatsoever of the Islamic Republic of Iran, of the religious component of that, of their culture, just as Persians. They just don't understand it, of the history, the things that they've done, and how their mentality is. And you don't understand anything if you think that, if you're surprised by that. I mean, you can't be surprised by that. But yet there he is saying it, and I think he really meant it.